Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, November 28th, 7 p.m. We're having committee meetings tonight, the first of which is the Committee of the Whole. And we have one topic under that being the Community Authority. I'll give a little bit of background information, and then we have some guests joining us tonight. We have Mr. Joe Recchi, Connor Willis from Community Partners, and we also have Misty Crosby from the Buckeye Hills Foundation. Just as a little bit of background, many of us know of the Ridges as it sits on the hill and have followed the history of it over the years. I'll pick up in very recent history in about 2015 when the university and the Ridges Advisory Committee were looking at the 2015 framework plan, which was helped shape much of the discussion for the priorities for the Ridges these last few years. And then I'll move forward quickly to 2022, this past year, where Buckeye Hills and Community Partners were building on that framework plan and were successful in obtaining a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission to do some further planning to look at and analyze the buildings, knowing that there's a need to stabilize the existing buildings, also review the infrastructure, and then study the market for what we might have for potential building on some of the areas in the future. And Joe and perhaps Misty too will present information that's been shared with the Ridges Advisory Committee, and in particular have three strategies that seem to make sense, most of which we're focusing on tonight will be the Community Authority. But why these three strategies would work, and so it would be the Community Authority, the Community Reinvestment Area, and also tax incremental funding, which we're somewhat familiar with and having moved that through City Council these past few years. And I think this is just a very encouraging moment for the community because we see so many positive things that are going on. Nancy Stevens and her work with the Ohio Museum Complex and some of the renovations that have taken place through that. The university's commitment as they have restored some of the buildings over the years. In fact, I think most recently the $17 million that was done on the first half of the Kirkbride proper complex. But we realize there's a need to move towards stabilizing and getting renovations made for the rest of the main buildings in that Kirkbride complex. So how do we go about that? And then also how do we plan for the future of that hundreds of acres that's such a community asset. So Joe, if you want to come on up to the podium, and it's yours for a while to present, and then we'll have time for questions.
That while is 10 minutes, if I'm correct.
Yeah, if you can.
So I'll try to be succinct. Thank you for inviting me or allowing me to come today. I am Joe Recchi. I'm the CEO of Community Building Partners, and I'm one of the co-developer partners that has been engaged by Ohio University in a development advisory function. We submitted a response 18 months ago or 20 months ago, and were selected in an RFP process to look at an overall strategy for the Ridges campus that builds on that successful framework that had tremendous amount of community engagement and consensus on on a pretty broad assessment and conceptual ideas about what works and what might not work at the Ridges. In particular, we focused on the historic campus, the many historic buildings that comprise a great asset for this community in this region. My background in community development started with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So I have a 40-plus year history of working with historic buildings, utilizing the tax credits, addressing the particular issues of meeting the challenge of the National Park Service in repurposing buildings. We see that as a sustainability effort because there's tremendous value, economic, but also environmental value in those built buildings. And having a campus, an almost intact campus of this size and dimension in the public realm and available and knitted together with the community would be an awesome achievement. We focused on translating concepts into an actual strategic plan. Once selected, we went about the business over the last 18 months of evaluating the buildings, evaluating the site. We obtained that grant that President Nisley had mentioned that allowed us to engage OHM advisors who are primarily engineers, planners and engineers, but we leaned hard into their engineering expertise to help us evaluate the site, to think about the infrastructure needs, both to upgrade the Kirkbride campus so buildings could be reused and to tie into the network that the county and the city are supportive of, the infrastructure network, and thinking in particular about long-term planning that addresses certain aspects of need that we're focused on in the framework, namely home ownership opportunities, should there be opportunity to exist, affordable housing. We focused on senior housing, but also on the potential for the creative arts and artisans in affordable housing, loft space and repurposing of buildings, housing for graduate families, other affordable home ownership opportunities and new construction opportunities, mixed in with select commercial development, because a mixed-use community is most successful when it has that activation of site. So there are about 20,000 square feet of existing buildings that we think would work really well for commercial users, and we're leaning hard into owner users, businesses who would own buildings, renovate those buildings compliant with the National Park Service standards, obtain the tax benefits associated with that, and operate their business as owners and occupants at the ridges, because we think that's how you build that safe, secure, and heavily committed community of residents and businesses. So that's the overall vision. We also took the approach that we didn't think it was one monolithic development. Instead, we would develop it in such a way that there could be many owners and users, so that there's a chance to lift off the local businesses and local economy, size such that local lenders, local builders, at the local level, it would be a job creator and economic development. We see historic preservation as an enormous economic development engine, and there are over 600,000 square feet of historic building on that site. So that's a monumental standard even for a large city. And here it is adjacent to the city of Athens. Now the problem is essentially the mismatch between the size of this project and the undertaking and the resources of the city or the county. We recognize that, and the university, which all have competing needs for your money. So we had discussions with the mayor about the potential of ARP funding. We realized very quickly there are many needs for that money, far more needs than there is money. Same story with the county. We realized at the state level we would be competitive, but we focused in my business on the public-private partnership, competing for funding to bring to a community. And we have successfully competed in literally every area of qualified funding in the state of Ohio. Every area that we would qualify, not what the city would qualify for. But among those tools we would wish to utilize to help bring the property up and make it feasible are tax increment financing that would be used to help us issue bonds that would be used for infrastructure, that would be at the obligation of a new community authority, which I'll kind of go through quickly, and also competitive grant funding through the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, through the Federal Home Loan Bank, allocation of tax credits, both federal and historic. The federal credits are by right when you follow the rules with a historic building. The state is a competitive process. We've successfully competed in all these areas, and we know that we can position these particular properties to attract that kind of investment. We've worked hard with institutional investors, so we know equity sources of long, patient capital that looks for tax-advantaged returns rather than cash-on-cash returns. And we worked with lenders who are familiar with both the tax-exempt bond arena and also conventional financing with Fannie Mae, which is basically a way of underwriting to improve the credit of projects as they move forward. So we're conversant in those areas. We wish to bring the collaborative efforts of that to Athens and to the Ridges site. And to do so, we're not asking for legislation today, but this is an informational presentation. There are 3 pieces of legislation that we think would be really significant, actually critical to the workings of a redevelopment. The first is the creation of a new community authority. And I know you've recently been through the CIC process. It's very similar. It's another section of the Ohio Revised Code. It's really designed for the kind of mixed-use community that has a significant amount of housing. The idea is that it starts with a organization and formation that requires your support and endorsement, the county's support, and of course, because Ohio University has the site, their support. So that's the first piece of legislation. The second is a creation of a Community Reinvestment Act area that would provide for tax abatement for a period of years. In addition, there would be a tax increment financing district. All three of these districts would be the same geography, the Ridges site, nothing more, nothing less. And each of them would have a component of, excuse me, tax reduction. That tax reduction is lifted over a period of time. At that time, the school receives the benefit of the school portion of the taxes. The county receives its portion. The city, of course, receives income tax revenue from residents and workers at the site, the redeveloped site. Excuse me,
I'm going
fighting
to
a
pause
cold.
for just a second. Do we know if there's any water right behind there? We probably could make that a lot easier. Just it raises up by a
If you don't, Andy, it's okay.
screen. There's a chain on the left. Got it. I know that feeling. There's nothing
Yeah,
more.
so those three pieces of legislation fit together as one unit. They require your support, they require the county commissioner's support, and they also require the school board support. The state receives, for a Community Reinvestment Act area, they receive your approval and designation, then they sign off on it. Thank you very much, Andy. They sign off on it, but they don't really have approval or disapproval. They basically see that it complies with the law. So before we would come to you with a petition for the creation of a new community authority, which is the way we initiate it, we would need to have an understanding or approval from the Board of Trustees of Ohio University. So we have presented, I'm just trying to create the framework for it, we've presented to the president and his chief staff the plan, including a very significant amount of economic analysis, which includes costs of infrastructure, which we think is about $7.1 million. A pro forma for each building that we think is possible to redevelop, including its underwriting, the way we can find the funding for it, and who the user would be and how that would fit into the economic framework. And then how that would feed into an assessment structure that would be used to retire bonds and to support the project. So those are being evaluated by the CFO at Ohio University, their staff, and then upon their review and recommendation, hopefully there will be a recommendation, it will go to their board to approve the concept, subject to approval of governmental authorities. So our plan would be to go through that process. We hope that will be successful, and we would come back to you with a petition to form a new community authority and the specific legislation that we would be asking for at a later date. And that later date would be sometime in the first or second quarter of 2023. We've discussed this with your law director and had repeated conversations with her about it, so she's conversant in the various areas of law. We would be retaining counsel to help develop that legislation, and again, it would be a collaborative effort because it involves so many parties going forward. It's important to note that we're not asking for money from the city. This doesn't involve you paying for anything. We're not asking for money from the county, and we're not asking for money from Ohio University. We heard what you said, and we looked to those other sources to bring economic development opportunity to the community in a way that builds a tax base that ultimately benefits the entire community. So that's our game plan. In essence, we've built on the consensus that already exists. We've had great support from city staff. They've been super informative. Andy has been especially informative of facilities, of planning, of engineering issues and challenges, and gave a lot of briefing and support to OHM in their engineering analysis. We've met with Ohio EPA, the State Historic Preservation Office, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, the Ohio Air Quality Development Authority. So we understand how those folks can play a meaningful part in supporting this effort and bringing the resources that are needed to recognize the true value of the Ridges site. It is exceptional in every respect, and not the least of which is it's positioned so beautifully adjacent to a world-class university and a city that is a cultural center. So we feel it's very promising. It's also very challenging, but the state has many programs that have been designed around the catalytic investment that occurs. No small community has accessed them because by definition you have to have a big project moving forward and you have to have a big vision. So Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland continue to tap those markets, and new legislation is created that continues to favor them. You happen to be in a situation in this community where you can compete with them successfully, and we're here to help you do it. So with that, I'm open to any questions. Again, this is informational. I'm happy to provide more detail to you as we develop it. We have a website that we're working on to help communicate more broadly and build community engagement to continue the work that's been done in the framework effort.
So we'll see if council members have questions or comments first, and then the mayor and administration, and then if the audience has any questions. So council members Bjelnes.
Well, thank you. I must say this sounds very exciting, and we've been waiting for something to happen with the Ridges because, as you're well aware, it's deteriorating rapidly, which is a great concern. We don't want to lose that wonderful historic building, and I'm sure it does have many possible uses. I guess the first question that comes to my mind, because I'm a visual person, is what's it going to look like? And I can't envision all the things that you're telling me would be included. So when are we going to see that?
Well, as for the vision, what's nice about a historic campus like this is picture the campus at, say, the year 1900, when the buildings were well maintained and you had 1,900 people using it and staff and everybody. That's the intention of the historic buildings. When you look at the National Park Service standards for rehabilitation, it's really a compendium of common sense approaches to construction and reconstruction of historic buildings. So one of our primary focuses is the building that is the most at risk, buildings 2, 3, and 4, because it's got the open roof and the moisture infiltration and so forth. If you can picture that building restored in its current dimension with tuck pointing, with the windows repaired, with the 2023, 2024 building code, a building that is fire resistant, that meets all of the ADA requirements and is in full utilization. We see it as 102 senior housing units of mixed income. That's how we see it. And we see it in a green, which is what the campus is, and how that would play out. Building 5, which is behind it, we see as artists live work studios. And we think that integrates really well with the other uses at the site. It's adjacent to an art museum. It's adjacent to a campus with a wonderful fine arts program, minting new artists every year. So we think there's a chance to capture some highly trained folks that might relocate to another area. I'm from Columbus. I've seen artists displaced multiple times from neighborhood to neighborhood. As they aggregate, they create value, which drives rents up and pushes them out. In my lifetime, I've seen them pushed. My own peers who are artists have been pushed 4 times. What a wonderful way to create a collective. We visited Asheville, North Carolina, to look at how a collective of artists actually not only helps themselves, but drives their whole economy. $1.6 billion of revenue, of economic development revenue, occurs in Asheville, North Carolina. Now, Asheville is become a national focus for artists, and that's great. But they don't have an Ohio University at their back door. They're not minting fine arts, so they did something out of nothing. You have a lot to work with. So I think, in essence, the historic buildings would look like activated buildings in their current dimension following that rehabilitation standard. I think all the buildings are salvageable, and they all can be rehabilitated using those standards. So you would expect to see those buildings looking the way they looked in their prime.
Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you for being here tonight. I'm usually an optimistic person, and I'm excited also for the possibilities at the Ridges. But I've also been up there a lot, and I know what the state of affairs is. My question to you is not so much on the sort of the end game, but I believe the university has kind of given a timeline to things, that if we can't get things moving in a certain direction by a certain time, then 2, 3, and 4, I believe, there's not going to be, the roof's not going to be replaced, that it's going to be kind of back to nature kind of idea. Can you help me understand your progress and how that matches up with the university's sort of timeline for that eventuality?
Well, first I want to clarify, I haven't been given a timeline like that
Okay.
from the university. I think they engaged us because we were action-oriented. We didn't want to produce or publish a new study. We didn't want to create another edition of the same study. We're not in that business. We're in the business of executing a strategy. So our approach, we know from our own experience, it's 2 years of competition. From the time we have site control and proper zoning, it's 2 years of competition to assemble the funding that is required to lift those 2, 3, and 4 off. Now, some measure can be taken to stabilize the property in advance of that. But you point out, that the university, the concern I think is legitimate. The university's mission is education. They don't have the resources available for them to do other kinds of work. That's really why the new community authority is being suggested, interposed in a sense, to help steward that forward, because it doesn't have an educational function as a primary function. Its primary function is put the resources together and the strategy to develop that parcel. So it doesn't have the multiple claims on its time. It's focused laser sharp on trying to get that development. So I think that's the major difference.
And
That 2-year competition, we can lay that out in great detail, every single component of it, because we're busy doing it elsewhere. So you compete for funding. Some of the funding comes by right and by process. Some comes from competition, and we know how to do that.
And that 2 year,
Yeah, go ahead.
2 year is starts when the community authority is created, right? Not the 20 months you've already been working.
Correct. So it's really, we look at it as if we do a critical path, and we'll do one and share it for specific parcels so you can track the progress. Because the other part of the new community authority is it is set up as a nonprofit. It's a sub-government authority. It's audited. Everything we're doing is cost certified. Everything we do is in compliance with federal rules, ADA rules. So we're really set up to perform in that fashion, in a highly transparent fashion. And that it's important in another sense. The Voinovich School is right at the Ridges. It is the center of economic development research activity for the region. It's receiving EDA funding. It's doing the research. It's publishing. We're right there. Everything we're talking about is replicable in other communities in Appalachia, and it's replicable elsewhere in this community. So yes, some aspects are very large. Buildings 2, 3, or 4 is over 100,000 square feet, but some of those commercial parcels are 3,000 square feet, 6,800 square feet. Those are easy. You can easily find those buildings in adjacent communities or this community. And the same pathway we're creating and publishing, we think can be replicated by others. We do see it as economic development for more than just the Ridges.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, Councilmember Crowell, I could be wrong, but Andy, you've been on the meeting. Service Safety Director Stone has been on the Ridges Advisory Committee meetings before. And that 2 year, we're going to let it return to nature was, there's a hole in the roof, it's going to cost over $1 million to fix it. We don't have the plans. We're not going to put any more money into it because our mission is education. And so I think that was if there were no other plans, if there's nothing else coming forward, that was the university's intent of letting it return to nature. But I haven't heard anybody say that recently.
I haven't. I think we've been encouraged by the university to keep pressing forward and find those resources that would help the community and help the university.
Yes, Councilmember Swank.
I really appreciate you being here today, Mr. Ritchie. And I apologize when I laughed when you referenced Athens, or Asheville, North Carolina, because when you referenced Asheville, I looked down and this pen in my hand is from a restaurant I'm sure you're very familiar with on Pack Square at Curate,
Okay.
the Tapas restaurant.
So it's sheer coincidence.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. What they've done with the River Arts District down there is phenomenal. And we often cite other places. I think what we have to be careful of, and I know this for a fact, in citing those other places, we're not saying that those places are better than us, but there are opportunities that we can bring from there to our location here.
Well put.
That said, several questions for you. Affordable housing has been quite the topic around here for many, many, many years back, actually going back to the late 2000s, and a failed attempt to put affordable housing, particularly senior housing, in at that time. Just out of curiosity, and I don't mean to pin you down to a figure, but how do you define affordable housing? Give me a ballpark figure, parameters, price-wise, what
Well,
we're looking at when we talk about affordable housing in a project such as this as you envision it.
So the way I look at affordable housing is what complies with the Internal Revenue Code definition, which is housing that's affordable to folks spending 30% of their income for housing and utilities if their income is 60% or less than the median income for the community. So it's a very concrete, because I know people are all over the board on it, but that can be, we're doing a project in Marietta, Ohio with Buckeye Hills Regional Council, and we have earmarked a certain number of units that are affordable at 30% median income. So that is reaching to a low income, a certain amount at 50%. Affordable people at 50% for that area. So Athens has a higher income than Washington County, but it's a lower income than Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
Now, as you can imagine, in the competition, because you're following these federal rules, people head toward those higher income communities, and most of the effort is being applied in those areas. The median income in Columbus, Ohio is over $80,000. So 60% of that creates pretty expensive housing. It's still called affordable. Here, your median income is lower. Housing costs would have to be, including utilities, would have to fit in the $500 to $600 range to be, and that's including utilities. So that's a street rent of $450, which is hard to achieve. Mm-hmm. And that's a unit that is sprinklered, that is elevated, that has supportive services for seniors. For artist live-work units, that would include, they probably structured as 2-bedroom units because the law has, the size of the unit is designed as 2 bedrooms, but it would actually be a studio and a bedroom or convertible space, because the idea would have live-work units for artists and artisans. Those two would be affordable. So the rent range, if you use what's called income averaging, and I don't mean to jump into the weeds on this, if you have very low rents set for some people, you can have higher rents elsewhere. That might be ideal. We had National Land Advisory do a market study. That gives you the broadest band of potential users. So you make room for some very reduced rents, and you have some that are closer to market but still lower than market.
So you're speaking rents as opposed to ownership?
Those are for rental units.
Okay.
Then on ownership units, we think there are certain parts of that site, existing buildings, that could be rehabilitated and deliver housing units between $100,000 and $130,000. That is affordable.
Yes, sir.
It would be a very affordable number if interest rates were what they were last year at this time. Right now, we're at a 21-year peak. I hate that. I hate the feasibility of it. But when you look at the forward curves, which we have to, you'll see that most people are betting that interest rates will moderate over a 2 to 3 year period. If you look out 5 or 6 years, probably more moderate. But and this is a plan that builds out over a 10-year period. So we think there's opportunities for affordable housing. We think there's opportunities for new construction in the $215,000 to $275,000 range. That too is affordable, certainly less affordable when interest rates are 7%, but we're talking about high quality, energy efficient housing that would be in a beautiful setting. So we do think that and we also think there's 6 units that would be luxury condominiums that would be priced at over $500,000. I know that might shock people, but it's that doctor's building that is across from the Voinovich Second. It's a 12,000 square foot building. It's so gorgeous. So a historic renovation of that, maybe we would attract some high income alumni or somebody that would want to come and be on the campus. Making it a broader band of interest is great for the community. So we don't think there's much of a market for it in that high price range, but there is that one particular building that would be repurposed in a beautiful way as condominiums.
Well, I like your numbers, and I would agree. You've covered the full range here. Speaking of ownership, you mentioned that you're looking at the business owners actually owning the building.
Yes.
Where they might own the building, would they own the property?
Yes. So to make if you look at the Kirkbride campus, it's a historic campus, and part of what makes it historic is the green, the drives, the way everything's positioned. But if you apply today's PUD plan to it, and you tried to make public streets and divisible legal parcels, it would be very, very complicated. So our strategy is to create a mixed-use condominium out of the historic Kirkbride campus. That the condominium overlay permits legally divisible structures that can be mortgaged, owned, and financed. And that process will make it very much easier for a business to own a particular portion of it. An example of it is the dining hall associated with buildings 2, 3, and 4. Those octagonal buildings are two of them. They would be a great restaurant, but they don't have, that has to be, we think, rather than have a tenant in there and have a landlord, it would be better for the owner user to make the investment to build wealth the way they would by retiring a mortgage, and also so that they stick and stay. You don't want somebody to come in and just leave. You want to create that opportunity for many people. Those businesses are probably local businesses that would wish to expand in an environment where it's beneficial. And by beneficial, that means from a tax standpoint, they would enjoy the tax credit the same way big investors would, like these insurance companies and banks, and they would be able to build wealth in conjunction with their business. And we think they would most likely work very closely together, along with the other homeowners and interested owners in the project.
And the last part.
Okay.
This is the
One
last
last
part.
question. Yep,
Yeah,
okay.
this is
And
the
we'll
last part.
circulate to the
That's why I
others.
qualified. I said I had several rather than bouncing back and forth.
Okay.
The last part of this, there are currently, I'm going to use the word tenants, although that's probably the wrong word, entities that have been functioning up there for now 20-plus years in particular, and I have to ask this question, the Ohio University Child Development Center. Do you foresee displacing any of those or allowing those existing successful entities to continue in their current operational state?
They would all exist and continue in their current state.
Okay.
So I don't know what the legal status of those buildings are, but the plan, where if they're owned by Ohio University and improved with philanthropic funds or something, I think the plan would be to deed those over to them at no cost, because they would be participants and beneficiaries in the new community authority. So green space around them, what they've enhanced, even expansion, because I know there's maybe a waiting list. If there's expansion opportunities, we would like to talk about that. So we don't anticipate displacing any businesses. There are very limited users of it. And Ohio University, where all the buildings they're used and invested in, we expect them to stay and continue to use them, because all we're really doing is underwriting and helping everything around it. As you know, they're like surplus furniture, and there are certain parts of the basements and for storage and other areas. Obviously, they would not stay in those spaces if they need to be renovated. But they've spent money, quite a bit of money, on renovating, I think, 11 buildings there, and I would expect them to stay there.
Okay, other questions from council members? Yes, council member Ziff first, and then McCary.
Thank you, President Isley. Again, just to echo what everybody said, thanks for being here.
Thank you for
Clearly, a
having
lot of
me.
work's already gone into this, so I appreciate everything you bring to this. One question I have is, because this would be a historical building being renovated up to the standards, and I pulled it up, it's just right there on the internet, you can find those standards pretty easily, which is nice, thank you for that. Would there be a provision, if these buildings would be sold to private ownership, is there a provision to prevent them from, say, tearing it down? and just building some other freestanding structure that in no way goes with the overall architectural theme of the space.
Yes. So the new community authority would establish design standards, but in particular, we'd focus on the National Park Service standards. And because the tax credits are available, we wouldn't convey property to a business user that did not intend, we don't want to convey anything to anybody that's speculating. So a conveyance would be subject to a building permit, an approved plan, financing, compliance with the National Park Service standard. After they've done all that, they're not going to tear it down. But even if somebody wanted to tear it down, they wouldn't be able to build anything without meeting design standards. So I think we create enough incentives to highly promote compliance with the National Park Service standards and significant disincentives for trying to avoid that.
I sort of figured that was the case, but I figure if anybody's watching, just doesn't mean someone's going to come buy the building. I don't want people, because I know a lot of people around here care very deeply about the Ridges. I do. I grew up here. My mom wrote a book on the Ridges. And I think a lot of people will be afraid, like, oh, they're going to bring in private developers for condos. They're going to tear it down and build some terrible look. No, not the case.
So really, we intend
good.
to repurpose every one of the buildings there.
Love it.
That is the plan. That's why, going back to your earlier question, if you could just envision the campus in its prime state, and you drive around the campus and have all those buildings in use. The Child Center is a good example of a repurposing that was well done. It is modernized, obviously, but it is, it's a beautiful addition. If it could just have more complementary, even the secondary buildings, especially, what I learned in Asheville is the artists, they didn't have much historic buildings to work with. They were just crummy old buildings. They just put them back into service and made it work. Here you have historic buildings with a lot of detail, and so bringing them back makes it more attractive.
Councilmember McCary.
Thank you. I was hoping you could clarify who the ultimate decision makers would be when it comes to determining proportion of land for housing versus businesses and those kinds of matters.
So the process with the new community authority, you actually name a representative. The city names a representative to that new community authority. There are citizen representatives, I'm assuming, because the users at the site are Ohio University, they're probably going to name, they're the ones that are using it, so they would be the citizens involved in it. The developer names 3 or an equivalent to the citizens number. So it's kind of a balanced body that develops it. But my thinking right now is Ohio University wouldn't want to transfer the property until there's a complete comprehensive plan structured. And of course, when it's conveyed, right now it's under the jurisdiction of Ohio University. When it's conveyed, it's automatically part of your city. So it's subject to the zoning and controls that you already have. So city has a lot of input on how things are used and when they're used and how that fits together. They always will have that. Actually, much more so than you have now, because once it's conveyed, you're not annexing, it's already in the city. It's just subject to the jurisdiction of Ohio University, which is its own political division. So I think what happens is you have increased input on how things are used, and moreover, the university would not transfer it without a comprehensive plan that includes restrictive covenants running with the land, that is, controls that would be in perpetuity. We're proposing conservation easements, like whatever is determined to be the natural land, to go ahead and formalize that with a permanent recording so that the community knows what the active and passive recreational areas are, what the nature areas are, and what they can expect to see 100 years into the future. Because that restrictive covenant running with the land can be set forth by the common owner of all the land, which right now is Ohio University. So we think that coordinated approach, and again, that involves the conversation of all of us to make that work as well as it can. Many people already have a vision of what the ridges should be, including especially, you've got 700 acres and the campus itself is but 30 or 40. So most people, when they think of the Ridges site, they're thinking not just the Kirkbride campus, but all the nature, the trails, everything else. So we want to make sure that the common vision of the Ridges is what's respected going forward. It's an extraordinary opportunity because it's so much land, it's right in the city, it is ability to build a tax base, and it's supported by a university that has great interest in it.
Okay, we're going to see if there's, Councilmember Reisner, do you have a question at all, or?
No,
Okay, You're listening? Okay. Councilmember Spielness, one last question, then we're going to move on to administration and see if the audience has any questions or comments, because
Okay.
we've been 40 minutes.
Oops.
Thank you.
Not your fault.
All right, so at one point, you said something about $7.1 million as a cost. And I thought,
Infrastructure.
yeah, and I thought, looking at what the Ridges looks like and knowing how when you go to ancient buildings, there's lots of problems that could be uncovered that you didn't even anticipate. So I'm worried about if this could actually be done with the kind of problems that exist there, or the ones we don't even know about.
So I want to be qualifying that. The $7.1 million is referring to underground infrastructure. That'd be water and sewer upgrades that tie into the public system. So that's the it's not doing any of the buildings. It's just connecting the electrical grid, the water and sewer connections. The building cost, we think the hard construction cost at buildings 2, 3, and 4, it's approximately $36 million.
That
The
sounds
cost
more
of the adjacent side, which was done for flex space, the university got done for about $17 million. So that's the sort of order of magnitude that we're dealing with. There's quite a bit of money that's required. That, so we do anticipate some pretty heavy lifting to bring back buildings that are this old and deteriorated. So I didn't mean to imply that we could get it all. I wish we could.
I went, no
I guess we
way.
wouldn't be here talking, but
bargain.
we need to solve the public infrastructure problem because other investment can't tie in if we can't upgrade the infrastructure.
Sure.
So I want to give a moment for Mayor Patterson and Service Safety Director Stone to ask any comments or make comments or ask questions.
I'll be very brief. And I know the answer to this, but I think it's good for the public to hear. Could you go through, you touched on this a little bit, the structure of the Community Authority Board? Because basically there's going to be a advisory board that's part of this.
So the
Can
new
you talk
community-
to what the different entities are that make up that board?
So the Ohio Revised Code spells out how to do it. It's basically the municipality names a member. There are a minimum of 3 citizen members that are people that are employed in or living at the site, and then the developer names 3. So I'm assuming since the Ohio University is using the site and their employees are the ones that they're probably the initial are named by them. Ultimately, long-term, it becomes kind of a giant homeownership association because you have an election and citizen members become those who live and work in the space. And so it's a self-governing structure, but to be lifted off, it has to start with the good grace of the community and supported by the existing users, in this case, Ohio University, and ourselves. Ultimately, we step away, it becomes a citizen-run association.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Service Safety Director
And
Stone.
if I could just make one comment, President, I'll be very brief. So I've worked in the city now for almost 20 years, and I've dealt with the Ridges from an infrastructure perspective primarily, and also participated heavily in the Ridges Framework Plan. That was an effort, planning effort done by Ohio University several years ago that really took 2 years of work and a huge amount of community input to create the Ridges Framework Plan. A lot of other communities that had Kirkbride buildings, Columbus being one of them, tore them down once they ceased being used by the Ohio Department of Mental Health, and Ohio University has kind of kept it pulled together, or kept it together after annexation in the early 90s, and not done that like other communities in the state and the region have done. And so, what I would just tell everybody going forward is nothing he is saying is new as far as an approach. It's just putting the ways to do it. So the ends have always been there as far as a vision of this community, and that creation of the Ridges Framework Plan that happened several years ago with a tremendous amount of community input. This is the ways that will actually get to that point. And so I'm actually excited about it. I've listened to a lot of, frankly, pipe dreams about people who think, someone ought to just grow money trees and fix the ridges. But this is actually a way that it can happen. And that was one of the reasons that I've been so enthusiastic about supporting Joe and OHM's work with providing all the knowledge and background that we have. on that site.
Thank you. Helps to have that
I'm humbled at
perspective.
how succinct both of you are, and I took 40 minutes, so I apologize. You can count it against. I'll speak for 2 minutes next time.
You answered a fair amount of questions, so thank you very much. Do we have any comments or questions from the audience?
As a resident and economic developer, I say do it. It'll be a great
you.
project, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you for
We
having
hope
me.
to hear more, and,
I hope to provide more.
okay,
So,
great. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. Okay. We will move on now to Planning and Development Committee. And Molly Fitzgerald is here to present the annual report for the Economic Development Council. And welcome. And I will go ahead and, since Councilmember Grace is not here, I'll go ahead and field the questions. How about that? Okay?
So yes, Molly Fitzgerald, Director of the Athens County Economic Development Council. I think most people by now know who I am. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. I hope everyone had a nice long weekend, and I will too try to be succinct so we can keep things moving. So I come before the City Council every year ahead of the city's annual membership renewal to the Athens County Economic Development Council to provide you all with an overview of the activities and initiatives we've undertaken the past year. You know, the EDC is the county's economic development entity that works closely with our state and regional partners on efforts such as site development, a lot of downtown revitalization, business attraction, retention efforts, among many other things. We are a public-private partnership. The aim of the Economic Development Council is to, create living wage jobs in Athens County and diversify industry diversification in the county, as OU are heavily reliant on Ohio University. So here's a list of activities we were involved with throughout 2022. I'll get into some of these in more detail as we go, but feel free to refer back to it throughout the presentation. So secured funding, I put this together every year to show a list of the programs that our office assisted with or directly benefited from. And when I say our office, I mean the Economic Development Council as well as the Athens County Port Authority, which also runs through the EDC office. So, this is for all of the counties, or this is for all of the projects throughout the county. You see a lot of site development money in here, technical assistance and planning for communities throughout Athens County. The biggest win for us this year was over $5 million grant from the Economic Development Administration, awarded to the Port Authority for its construction of its 60,000 square foot speculative building. These are highly competitive grants, so that was a major win for Athens County. Some of the funding on this list that went specifically to the City of Athens includes technical assistance dollars coordinated through Buckeye Hills Regional Council that will create a plan for the Stimson Avenue corridor that will help the city achieve some of its development goals. It will assess programs that the city can take advantage of to meet those goals, such as tax increment financing, which you just heard of, downtown redevelopment districts, and other tax incentive programs. We also secured brownfield remediation funding through the state for 2 properties in the city that I'll discuss in more detail in a moment. And moving on here, I always do a project spotlight each year. This year it's not in the city of Athens, it's out in the plains. It's the industrial park, and that $5 million from the Economic Development Council, from the Economic Development Administration. So just a quick update, that building, once built, will create 100 jobs. It'll generate $5 million in private investment, and that's going to benefit the city of Athens as well, obviously. We expect to go to bid by the 4th quarter, hopefully by the end of the year. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. When you're dealing with EDA money, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to stay compliant. And then construction will begin by Q2 of 2023. Okay, so the brownfield remediation program. So the Athens County Port Authority, we worked very closely with the land bank as well. We secured $1.4 million in assessment, cleanup, and demolition funds for properties throughout Athens County. 2 of those properties in the city are 83 Columbus Road, which received both assessment and remediation funding, just over about $445,000, I believe. And then 63 South Court Street, formerly housed Follett's. Everyone on this council knows that building has sat vacant for a couple of years, and so we really want to get that back up and operational and see some activity. It's a center of the uptown area. So luckily we were notified that funding did come through the state brownfields program. The exact amount is evading me, but it's a hefty amount, and that will go towards mostly asbestos remediation and some demolition. Moving on, downtown revitalization. So this is really, in the 7 years that I've been with the Economic Development Council, I haven't seen ever such a focus on downtown revitalization, at least through an economic development lens. So we're seeing that a lot at the state through Jobs Ohio has programs, ODOD has programs all focused on downtown revitalization, and of course the Appalachian Community Grant Program, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. And this focus on downtown revitalization is particularly exciting for some of our smaller, more rural communities that have experienced a lot of disinvestment the last 20 to 40, 50 years. We know that to attract businesses and to attract workforce, the community needs to have that vibrancy and that quality of life that we all look for. So I'm just calling out 3 communities here, Chansey, Gloucester, and Albany, where a lot of great downtown revitalization work is happening. And a lot of that is really capitalizing on the great work that's already happening in those communities. Gloucester and Chansey, a lot around our natural outdoor recreation assets. And then Albany, with it being the last flat land, the Port Authority and the EDC really see that as the next focus area for some site development focused on additive manufacturing, light manufacturing. It has rail running through the property. It is close to a 4-lane highway. It's close to the university's airport, which my understanding is that the airport is committed to exploring ways to increase commercial activity too. So it just makes sense. This next slide is just a preliminary engineering report that DLZ did that shows what a future Albany Industrial Park could look like. Okay, Appalachian Community Grant Program, and I'm sorry I'm running through these, I don't want to keep you guys long. I think everyone here is probably by now aware of what this program is. This is the $500 million investment in the 32 Appalachian Ohio counties. So the EDC is supporting the City of Athens implementation ask, which will focus on the build-out of a remote work network in the region, really through the rehab and the renovation of downtown or uptown, depending what community you're in, buildings. So it's a multifaceted approach that touches on workforce development, downtown revite, and this idea of community vibrancy. Communities involved, as you're probably all aware, City of Athens, Village of Somerset, Logan, Coshocton, and possibly the Village of Gloucester. These have to be cross-collaborative regional projects, and I'm very excited to be supporting the city's application. I think it's a really wonderful project that has, some teeth to it. This is very competitive money. This is pretty much the same every year. I keep this slide in here. These are just some of the programs that our office manages, economic development tools such as tax incentive programs, the CHIF, the DRDs, the CRAs. You've heard a lot about these tonight from Joe. The revolving loan funds and the revenue bonds. So something that I would like to call out, the Port Authority did issue revenue bonds again this year for the 3rd and 4th phases of the Woda Cooper housing project on 682. That's just another tool that we have in our toolbox to attract and incentivize developers. And, I think the Port Authority, now that it has a few projects under its belt, really understands the importance of this tool and is ready to use it. So we're happy to participate in that project. I think they had a total sales just for the 3rd and 4th project, or 3rd and 4th phases of the project. I think the developer got a total sales exemption of over $500,000. Don't quote me on that, though. Around there. These are just our partnerships. These are pretty much the same every year, maybe a little tweaks here and there. And then looking forward to 2022. So, yeah, I don't have my most updated slide here. So 2 things that are really pertinent to the city that aren't here that I want to mention. One is that I'll be serving as a non-voting member on the city's new Community Improvement Corporation as its economic development member. And looking forward to assisting the city's efforts to get some blighted properties back on the tax rolls. And then two, the city's revolving loan fund. So those are CDBG funds. We're moving into 2023. We're going to be looking at repurposing that loan fund to make it more accessible to businesses looking to grow and expand in the city, and then exploring catering these funds more specifically to women and minority-owned businesses. So those are two things specific to the city we'll be looking at in 2023. Other than that, of course, the spec building project is underway. Hopefully we'll be implementing these Appalachian Community Grant Program funds, continued revite efforts in our smaller villages, build out of the Albany Industrial Park, and then, of course, supporting housing developments throughout the county. Did I do it? I didn't even check my time. So my contact information, my staff's contact information, we're a small office of, in 2023, 3 full-time staff members. But yes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions, and I'm happy to field questions now.
Questions from committee members? Councilmember Crowell?
Thank you. I'm particularly interested in 63 South Court Street. I saw you had a figure there for demo. I don't think means the building, but
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
yeah. So can you help me understand that a little bit? I know it's owned by a local group, and so did they apply to you for that money, or how does that all
Yeah,
work?
so the Athens County Port Authority is technically the recipient of those funds, so then we'll have an agreement with the property owner to spend the money. And it's my understanding that was the developer interested in repurposing that building into a hotel and some mixed-use commercial development. That purchase agreement was contingent on the securing brownfields funding, because it was a lot of money that needed to go into the building, especially around the asbestos abatement and all of that. So that's my understanding of how that works.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Other questions or comments of other council members? Councilmember Swank?
Oh, you used the phrase attracting businesses, or businesses. Well, when businesses are looking to either move to Athens or start a new business in Athens, 2 parts to this question. What would you say would be the top 5 things they're looking for? And secondly, what can we as a city do to help you bring those businesses to Athens?
I'll answer the second one first. Continue your membership of the Economic Development Council. No, that's a really good question. Obviously, support, as much financial support as we can offer. If they are creating jobs, payroll, and making significant capital investments in the community, that makes them eligible for programs through entities like Jobs Ohio, for the build-out of the facility, the improvements, the M&E and the facility infrastructure upgrades. So obviously they want to know that the community and the state are supportive of what they're doing. Housing, they want to see the quality of life, right? It's not surprising. They want to they need the workforce. That's obviously not an Athens challenge. That's not a state of Ohio challenge. It's a national, arguably global challenge, retaining and recruiting and really training talent to fill positions. So obviously having the university here is a huge asset to us. We can forge partnerships between industry and the university to ensure that they at least have a pipeline of workers coming out of, whether it's the College of Business, the engineering school. So I do think, let me preface this too by saying, we focus probably 80% of our time on business expansion. So the businesses that are already here, we know they're committed to Athens. How do we continue to help them grow and expand, create more jobs, create more payroll, and keep making investments in Athens? The other 20% is that attraction effort. So the spec building is a good example. We might have a business in Athens County that says, hey, we're going to create 50 more jobs. We need way more space. We want to take that building. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this is going to be an effort where a new business, we will come up with creative tax incentives, work with Jobs Ohio, and hopefully get a business in there that is, again, committed to paying higher wages, because the focus for that building, again, is biotechnology, advanced manufacturing, biohealth. Tenants that would be, for example, come out of the Ohio University Innovation Center, our business incubator. So I guess I'm saying that 20% is more that attraction piece. Most of our efforts are focused on keeping our current businesses and helping them grow.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Mayor Patterson.
I'll be really quick.
No, it's okay. It's
You know, I just want to say that, you know, Sarah Mars Maxfield, who was the director, and Molly worked with Sarah. Molly is doing an outstanding job as the executive director for the EDC. Councilmember Swank, to your question, you know, one of the things I think was important was for the city to start creating our downtown redevelopment districts, or our DRDs. And Molly was really helpful with us getting our DRDs together initially. One in particular is the Washington, 234 Washington Street DRD. That's the one that Stuart McDonald building is in. That's a great example of the EDC helping
yes.
to retain and to expand what I call one of our heritage or legacy companies here in Athens. If you haven't had the chance to go through the Stuart McDonald building, and in particular up to the 3rd and 4th floor, which back in the day were not usable, they were cold storage. And now it's a fully functional building, but it was the EDC doing a lot of work to make that come across the finish line, which led to job creation, retention for sure, but also creation, where they added jobs, they consolidated, brought jobs into the city and expanded. So that is squarely on the shoulders of the EDC.
It's coming up with those creative packages to keep the businesses. So Stuart McDonald, Athens Mold Machine's another good example. With StuMac, it was a mix of historic preservation tax credits. It was revitalization money from Jobs Ohio. It was the local utilities, AEP, Columbia Gas coming forth with smaller grants to support the project that made it feasible. Because, you know, that's a thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. It's a great example where it probably, without all of those creative solutions and that support from the state and the city, every level, it would have probably made it'd be economically feasible for them to build a new building way cheaper, right, out somewhere else. We didn't want that to happen. That's a beautiful historic building that, yes, I highly recommend you go take a tour of it. You feel like you're in a loft in New York City. And that's what we need more of here in Athens County. So, yeah. All right. Thank you all very much.
Questions?
Oh,
Thanks for being with us tonight.
thank you all. Yeah, have a great evening.
Appreciate the update. Finance and personnel.
Okay. Couple of items on our Finance and Personnel Committee agenda tonight, starting with the AFSCME 3351, our fire contract, which is on our drive. I will just say that I believe this contract is substantially complete. However, there may be one tweak to Article 16, which contains the grievance procedure with the fire department. As you all will recall, we have part of the negotiated contract are increases of 4.5% for 2023, which is retroactive to November 5th of 2022, and then the second 2 years of the contract are at 4.25% increase. I would just like to turn it over to Director Stone to see if he has anything to add before we go to questions.
Thank you, Member Crow, and the various components of the negotiations and the outcome from negotiations. There was some push-pull in different places, but we're happy as an administration with the product that we got. You see it all in front of you with the changes highlighted and crossed out, portions of the existing collective bargaining agreement that were changed, crossed out, and then new information added. The one Article 16 that Member Crow mentioned is something that we overlooked during negotiations and ultimately reached tentative agreement without addressing that. And what that was is to change the procedures in Article 16 to comport with the changes we made back in spring of 2022 when we reorganized the fire department to not have shift captains any longer and instead have lieutenants as the people in charge of the individual shifts. And so it's really something we think is a minor change. We've got some language to the union. What I'd really like to do is get that additional change made and in the document that comes before you next Monday or for first reading, so that I don't have to do it after the fact. But if for some reason we end up having a back and forth with the union, I don't intend to hold up this contract. I intend for you to ask you to go ahead and pass it, and then we'll just seek an MOU later. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee about the fire contract? Other members of council? Member Swank?
Has the fire union voted on this yet
Yes,
and approved it, I take?
they ratified, yes.
Yes, thank you.
City administration, elected officials, members of the public. Okay, moving on to the next item on our finance and personnel agenda, appropriations. We have two appropriations, one in the amount of $16,100. This is for Arts, Parks, and Recreation Debt Fund, Fund 450, transaction code 400. Are there any questions about this appropriation to the debt fund? Arts, Parks, and Recreation, from committee members, other members of council, city administration, public. And the second appropriation is $96,000 to the general fund mayor. This is 101.101, transaction code 100, personnel connected to our new diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, and I believe the administrative support in the mayor's office. This is in the mayor's office. Are there any questions about this appropriation from the committee? Other members of council? Anything to add? Administration? Public? Okay, thank you. Now we're on to two final items on our agenda. They are connected. The third-party health insurance administrator. This is an annual contract we have with EBSC, the Employee Benefit Service Center. As you know, we are self-insured in the City of Athens. We have the City of Athens Health Benefit Plan, but we do contract with a third-party administrator. And this contract is coming up for renewal. Any questions from committee? Other members of council? Mr. Swank.
A couple questions. You mentioned the third party is EB.
EBSC,
Yeah, and
Employee Benefit Service Center.
And I take it this is a company we've worked with in the past? Is this something that we routinely look at in terms of comparing proposals from one company to another?
We have. As a matter of fact, we were with a different TPA when I first took office. And we took a deeper dive into services rendered versus those of others. And that's when we landed with this group to where they've been performing extremely well for the City of Athens when it comes to looking at our pharmaceutical plan or prescription plans, rather, healthcare delivery and whatnot. So we do look, but they've been performing really well.
Good. And I noticed in reading through the documentation the name of a local individual who is our quote unquote representative, which was good to see too. So doing business local.
Other questions from the public? Okay, and the last item on our agenda tonight is our stop loss medical insurance, also referred to as excess insurance or excess loss. This is with the company Sirius or Cyrus, I'm not sure how we pronounce Sirius America Insurance Company. But of course, this gives us protection against large claims or unpredictable losses. Are there any questions from the committee on the stop loss? Other members of council? Would the administration like to say anything to the stop loss?
Speak to it. Functionally, our third party, our TPA, bids this for us every year. And what this is the insurance above and beyond the cap that our pool, our self-funded pool, pays for. So right now we carry a $110,000 specific deductible cap. So if a particular insured goes above $110,000 in cost for a given year, it goes into that stop loss insurance pool, and we pay a premium for that pool. And so at the end of each year, the TPA will go out on the market and bid that for us, basically looking at what we're insuring here internally, and then they'll make a recommendation on what the best stop loss insurance is. And actually, this is the same one that we had last year, but there were 5 different ones that we compared, and this was the best one. So,
Thank you, Director Stone. Other questions? Members of the public? Thank you, President Isley. That ends Finance and Personnel.
Okay. I think we are adjourned at 8:09 PM. Thank you very much, everyone.